It started with a photograph, a faded snapshot taken on a humid July afternoon in 1963. A boy smiling in front of a rust-colored barn, sunlight catching the freckle on his cheek. His name was Tommy Dillard, and the next morning, he was gone. For 60 years, the town of Willow Creek whispered theories. Kidnapping, drowning, maybe something darker. But when that photo resurfaced in 2023, tucked inside a forgotten attic box, it didn't just reopen the case, it solved it. Just not the way anyone imagined. What the photo revealed wasn't who took Tommy, but who never let him go. If stories of long-buried secrets and impossible coincidences keep you up at night, subscribe, and let's step into the past together. The storm had passed hours ago, but the air still hummed with the faint scent of rain and rust. Detective Marianne Kepler stood beneath the flickering light of an attic bulb, brushing decades of dust from the cardboard box she just pulled from the rafters. It was late, nearly midnight, and the Dillard farmhouse creaked like something alive. The county had condemned the house. She'd been told it was empty, but when the letter arrived at the county office last week, evidence in the Tommy Dillard disappearance enclosed, confidential, curiosity had outweighed procedure. Inside the box, a handful of items sealed in plastic, a small shoe, a sheriff's badge, and the photograph. She held it by its edges, light trembling across its glossy surface. A boy of about 10 stood in a wheat field. Behind him, a barn leaned slightly to the right, its red paint blistered by sun and time. A man's shadow, long and distorted, stretched from the camera's edge toward the boy's feet. Marianne felt something tighten in her chest. She'd seen hundreds of crime scene photos, but this one felt alive. She flipped it over. On the back, faint pencil handwriting, Willow Creek, July 14th, 1963. Last good day. The attic groaned under a sudden gust. For a moment she thought she heard movement downstairs, a door shifting against its hinges, a soft, deliberate creak. Her flashlight's beam danced across old furniture, peeling wallpaper, a lifetime abandoned. She told herself it was just the wind. The Dillard disappearance had haunted the county since before she was born. Tommy had been the only child of Frank and Ellen Dillard, owners of a small feed store on Main Street. On the evening of July 15th, 1963, Ellen called the sheriff's office to report her son missing. She said he'd been playing outside near the old barn. When she went to call him in for dinner, he was gone. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, just a toy airplane in the dirt. The search went on for weeks. Volunteers, bloodhounds, the National Guard combing the surrounding woods. Nothing. By autumn, the case had gone cold. In the years that followed, the story turned into legend, the boy who vanished into thin air, a symbol of the innocence that small towns pretend never leaves them. Marianne's mother had known Ellen Dillard briefly. She remembered how the woman stopped speaking after that summer, how she'd sometimes be seen sitting on her porch long after sunset, staring toward the barn. "She died with her eyes open," her mother once whispered, as if she was still waiting for him. Now, 60 years later, Marianne stood in that same house, surrounded by ghosts and evidence no one had ever seen. She looked again at the photo. The light angle, the position of the barn, the peculiar smudge near the boy's shoulder. Something about it nagged at her, like a puzzle missing its centerpiece. Her phone buzzed, startling her. "Deputy Roy. You at that old place again?" "It's near midnight, Marianne. Just tying up loose ends." "Roy. Well, tie quick. I don't like that property after dark." She smiled faintly. Roy was superstitious, but he wasn't wrong. There was a heaviness here, a residue of sorrow that clung to the air. When she ended the call, she noticed something new. Beneath the photo in the box, hidden beneath yellowed newspaper, was a smaller envelope labeled Private. to be opened only if the photo is found. Her pulse quickened. She tore it open carefully. Inside was a single note written in the shaky hand of an old man. They said he disappeared, that he was taken. But I know where Tommy went. I took the picture, and I buried the truth. F.D. Marianne's breath caught. Frank Dillard. She stared at the photo again, now seeing not the boy, but the shadow stretching toward him. It wasn't the shadow of the photographer. It was reaching from behind the barn. And suddenly, the attic felt occupied. The summer of 1963 had come to Willow Creek like a fever dream. Hot, relentless, humming with cicadas that sang from dawn until dusk. The Dillard house sat at the far edge of town, beyond the old railway tracks, where cornfields met a strip of untamed woods. It was the kind of house that looked built to last. Pale clapboard walls, wide porch, 2 rocking chairs that had seen 1,000 sunsets. Inside lived Frank and Ellen Dillard, and their son Tommy, a boy who never stayed still for long. He was 10 years old that summer, curious, bright, always with dirt on his knees and an airplane clutched in one hand. Neighbors said you could hear him before you saw him, the sound of his laughter carrying through the wheat, his voice calling out for adventure. It was a Thursday when Ellen took the now famous photograph. She'd been doing laundry when she noticed Tommy out by the barn, chasing fireflies even though it was barely noon. She wiped her hands on her apron, grabbed Frank's old Kodak from the shelf, and stepped outside. "Hold still, sweetheart," she called, shielding her eyes against the sun. "Let me get one before you run off again." Tommy squinted toward her, grinning with a mischievous pride only a child can have. Behind him, the barn leaned slightly to one side, its red paint blistered and fading, and the tall summer grass rippled like waves. The shutter clicked once, a moment captured forever. Later that evening, Ellen pinned the photo on the kitchen corkboard to dry. Frank came in from the shop, wiping grease from his hands. He gave it a glance and smiled faintly. "You and that camera," he said. "You'll run out of film before the boy runs out of summers." Ellen smiled back, unaware that there would be no more summers to photograph. That night, as the sun dropped low behind the trees, Tommy asked if he could play by the barn before dinner. Ellen hesitated. She didn't like him near the woods after dark, but Frank said it was fine. "He's a good boy. Knows to stay close." At 7:15 p.m., Ellen called him in. No answer. She stepped onto the porch, wiped her hands, and called again. "Tommy?" Silence. The barn door creaked in the wind. The wheat whispered. The air, still heavy with daylight, seemed to hold its breath. When she reached the barn, the first thing she noticed was the toy airplane lying in the dirt, one wing broken clean off. Tommy was nowhere. No footprints in the soil. No signs of a struggle. Just the faint smell of something metallic, almost like rust. By nightfall, half the town had gathered on Willow Creek Road. Sheriff Cal Norris organized a search party with flashlights and dogs. The Dillard farm glowed under the beams of headlights and lanterns. Ellen stood on the porch in her nightdress, trembling, whispering the same words over and over. "He was right here. He was right here." Frank moved through the fields like a man possessed, calling his son's name into the darkness until his voice broke. By midnight, there was still nothing. The next morning, a team of volunteers found a small set of footprints near the creek behind the barn, but they led into the water and vanished. Rumors spread fast in a town that small. Some said Tommy had fallen into the creek and been swept away. Others whispered that a stranger's truck had been seen on the highway the day before. But there were stranger whispers, too. A few of the older locals claimed they'd seen Frank walking toward the barn after sunset, alone. One neighbor swore Frank was digging by the old oak that night, a lantern swinging by his side. When the sheriff questioned him, Frank's answers were calm, almost too calm. "I was looking for my boy," he said. "If I was digging, it was to find him." No evidence tied him to anything, But after that day, the townspeople's eyes changed when they looked at him. Ellen withdrew completely. She stopped going to church, stopped talking to neighbors. The once vibrant woman who'd captured her son's last smile now sat on her porch for hours, staring toward the barn, her camera long abandoned. Weeks passed. Summer ended. The posters faded on telephone poles. By fall, the sheriff's office closed the file. Missing person, presumed dead. But Frank Dillard never stopped searching. Every night for years he'd walk to that barn, flashlight in hand, tracing the same path, whispering the same name. Some nights neighbors claimed they saw him talking to someone, though no one else was ever there. And then, one winter evening in 1971, he vanished too. The farm went to ruin. The barn collapsed inward, and the Dillard story slipped into legend. It wasn't until decades later, when Detective Marianne Kepler found the photograph, that the truth began to stir again. Because in the lower corner of that image, under bright exposure and grain, there was something no one had noticed before. A faint outline, a shape in the shadow of the barn that wasn't just the breeze or bad lighting. A man's hand, extended, reaching toward the boy. When Detective Marianne Kepler carried the photograph into the station the next morning, the air smelled of stale coffee and printer ink, the perfume of bureaucracy. She'd spent the night staring at the image under lamplight, convinced that something inside it was trying to speak. She placed it on her desk, right next to the faded case file she'd pulled from archives at dawn. Dillard, Thomas, missing juvenile. July 15, 1963. The folder was brittle with age. The pages inside were typed on a manual machine, the ink uneven, the tone clinical. But the story it told was anything but. At the top of the first report was the boy's photo, a cropped version taken from Ellen's original, stamped Evidence Exhibit A. Below it, the sheriff's summary read, "No physical evidence recovered. No ransom, no witnesses, presumed accidental death, possibly drowning." But if it was so simple, why had someone, likely Frank Dillard himself, written "Last Good Day" on the back of the original print? Marianne stared at the looping handwriting. There was tenderness in the letters, and guilt. She'd seen that combination before, the marks of someone who had lost more than they could explain. Deputy Roy leaned against her doorway, holding a styrofoam cup. "You're really digging into that old ghost story, huh?" She looked up, exhausted. "It stops being a ghost story the moment there's evidence," he shrugged. "County's been trying to sell that property for 20 years. You'll find more raccoons than suspects." "Maybe," she said, "but someone sent this to us on purpose. That means somebody's still alive, who knows something." Roy sipped his coffee, studying the photograph. "That shadow behind the barn. You think that's the father?" "Maybe. But look here." She pointed to the blurred shape in the photo's lower corner. "That hand doesn't match the lighting. It's darker than the rest, sharper. It's like whoever took this caught something moving behind the boy just as the shutter closed." Roy frowned. "Or it's just damage to the film." "Maybe." Her voice was soft, but her mind wasn't convinced. That afternoon, she drove to the County Historical Society, a brick building that smelled of mildew and old paper. Inside, Harriet Lang, a retired librarian who knew every file by touch, greeted her with a knowing smile. "I heard about your little discovery," Harriet said. "The Dillard boy, wasn't it? People still talk about him." Marianne nodded. "I'm looking for anything that didn't make it into the sheriff's report. Local articles, photographs, maps. Anything." Harriet disappeared into the back and returned with a yellowing stack of Willow Creek Gazette editions from July and August 1963. Marianne flipped through them carefully, scanning headlines. "Local boy missing near family farm." "Search continues, no leads." "Community holds candlelight vigil." Then, Halfway through the pile, something caught her eye. A photo of the Dillards taken just weeks before Tommy vanished. Ellen sat on the porch steps with Tommy on her lap, Frank standing behind them. The caption read, "Family prepares for annual county fair." But it wasn't the caption that chilled her. It was the man standing slightly behind Frank, barely visible in the corner of the frame. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even looking at the camera. His face was turned toward Tommy, his expression blank, almost hungry. Marianne's heart began to pound. "Harriet," she said, "who's that?" The older woman leaned over her shoulder, squinting. That'd be Mr. Caleb Ward. Worked at the feed store with Frank, if I recall. Quiet man, kept to himself. Died sometime in the 70s, I think. Do we have any record of him? Maybe an obituary. He never married. No kids. Marianne photographed the newspaper clipping on her phone. Something about Caleb's face unsettled her. Not just the way he looked at the boy, but how deliberate it seemed. As if he hadn't just been in the picture, but watching it unfold. That night, back at her apartment, Marianne pinned both photos on her corkboard. Tommy in front of the barn, shadow reaching toward him. The family portrait with Caleb Ward in the background. 2 moments frozen in time, connected by a glance. She poured herself coffee and started comparing them. The barn's shape, the angle of light, the grain of the film. Then she noticed something that sent a shiver through her. In both photographs, the shadow lines fell at identical angles, as if taken at the exact same time of day, under identical light, which was impossible. The first was taken by Ellen. The second was from a newspaper photographer. 2 cameras, 2 different locations, yet the lighting was identical, as if one scene had been staged to mirror the other. She leaned back, staring at the photos side by side. "What are you hiding, Frank?" she whispered. At 11:47 p.m., she received a call from Roy. "Mar, you might want to hear this," he said. "The lab cleaned up the photo you found, enhanced it. That shape behind the boy? It's not damage." She gripped the phone tighter. "Then what is it?" Roy hesitated. "It's a figure. A man, standing behind the barn door. You can see his face if you zoom enough. Barely, but it's there." Marianne's throat went dry. "Send it to me." Seconds later, the image appeared on her screen. It was grainy, distorted, but the outline was unmistakable. A man half concealed in the barn's shadow, his head turned slightly toward the camera. The details were faint, but the features were clear enough to feel human. Deep-set eyes, thinning hair, angular jaw. And though she'd never seen him in person, she knew exactly who it was. Caleb Ward. The Dillard property lay 5 miles south of Willow Creek's town square, down a road that seemed to forget where it was going. The asphalt cracked and faded to gravel, and weeds grew up the middle like a scar. Detective Marianne Kepler pulled her cruiser to the side of the overgrown lane, dust pluming behind her like smoke. It was mid-morning, but the clouds hung low, casting the fields in a flat gray light that dulled the world to silence. The house rose ahead, or what remained of it. The porch sagged, the paint peeled, and ivy climbed the walls as if trying to pull the structure back into the earth. Beyond it, the barn leaned the same way it had in that 1963 photograph, except now its doors hung from one hinge, and the red paint had weathered to the color of dried blood. Marianne got out, feeling the weight of the place pressed down on her. She half expected to hear a boy's laughter somewhere, a phantom echo from a happier time, but there was only the rustle of wind in the grass. She walked the property slowly, taking photos on her phone, documenting every detail. The grass was waist-high, except for a faint path leading from the porch to the barn, not made by animals, but by feet. Someone had been here recently. When she reached the barn, the air grew cooler. A cool metallic tang lingered. The big sliding door resisted her push, scraping along the dirt before giving way with a groan that seemed to travel up her spine. Inside, the barn was dim and hollow. Dust drifted in the air like snowflakes. Wooden beams, thick with cobwebs, framed the shadows. A rusted plow sat in one corner, an overturned bucket beside it. And then, the walls, scratched, deep grooves in the wood, irregular but deliberate. She ran her flashlight over them. Names, dozens of them, some faint, some freshly carved. Tommy, Frank, Ellen. And newer ones, written in uneven block letters. Marianne twice. Her stomach turned. Someone had been in here, carving names that spanned 60 years. She crouched beside the nearest post, tracing one of the carvings with a gloved finger. It was rough and shallow, but below the letters, she noticed something shiny, metal wedged into the wood grain. She took out her pocket knife and pried it loose. It was a button, tarnished but intact, the kind found on children's overalls. She held it up to the light. Blue enamel, chipped around the edges. The same color as the overalls Tommy Dillard wore in the photo. A sharp sound echoed behind her. The snap of a branch, followed by footsteps. Marianne's hand went to her gun. "Hello?" she called, her voice firm but careful. No answer. The footsteps stopped just outside the barn door. "Police," she said, louder now. "Identify yourself." A long pause. Then the faint crunch of gravel as someone backed away, slow and deliberate. Marianne stepped out into the daylight, scanning the field. Nothing but the breeze shifting the tall grass. Whoever it was, they were gone, but not far. She walked around the barn's far side, following the faint path through the grass. It led toward a small grove of trees near the creek. There, half buried under fallen leaves, was a collapsed well. Its stones were dark with moss, the opening wide enough for a grown man to slip through. Something inside it caught the light. Marianne leaned closer, shining her flashlight down. The beam struck metal, the curved handle of a shovel, rusted and half submerged in the soil. Next to it, what looked like fragments of wood, maybe an old crate, or a coffin. She crouched beside the well, snapping photos. The air around it smelled of decay and mud. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Roy again. "Marianne, you at the Dillard place?" "Yeah, why?" "Got a call from dispatch," he said. "Neighbor from across the road phoned in. Said she saw a man hanging around there last night. Middle-aged, beard, gray jacket. She thought he was you until she noticed him walking toward the barn with a flashlight." Marianne looked around at the empty field. "When last night?" "About 11. "That's impossible. I didn't get here until this morning," Roy exhaled. "Then whoever it was might still be out there." Marianne ended the call and turned toward the house. Its dark windows seemed to watch her. The door was ajar now. She was sure it had been closed before. She unholstered her gun again, stepping carefully across the porch. The floorboards groaned under her weight. Inside, the house was musty, heavy with dust and mildew. The living room was still furnished. A sofa draped in sheets, a clock frozen at 7:15. A photograph hung crooked on the wall, the same image she'd seen in the archive of the family on the porch before the fair. Someone had drawn an X over the father's face in red marker. Marianne's pulse quickened. She moved through the hallway, every creak sounding too loud. The kitchen smelled faintly of soil, as if someone had tracked mud inside. The back door was unlocked, and muddy footprints, fresh ones, led from the porch into the house. She followed them down the narrow hall toward a staircase leading to the cellar. The footprints stopped at the top step. She aimed her flashlight into the darkness below. Cobwebs glistened like silver thread. The air was cool and wet. Halfway down the stairs, her beam caught something on the floor, a stack of photographs scattered like playing cards. She picked one up. It was Tommy again, but different. His smile gone, his expression solemn. He was standing in front of the same barn, but now the doors were closed behind him, and in the reflection of the window above the barn doors, faint but visible, was a man's face staring out. The same man from the newspaper photo. The same man hiding in the shadows of the barn. Caleb Ward. Marianne's skin went cold. The sound of a floorboard creaked above her. She turned off her flashlight and froze. For a long moment, there was silence. Then the faintest sound. A whisper, almost too quiet to be real. "Don't look at the photo." Her breath caught. The voice was male, hoarse and close. When she raised her flashlight again, the beam caught a figure at the top of the stairs. Just for a second. A flash of gray fabric. A pale face. And then nothing. By the time she reached the landing, the door was swinging shut, and the sound of retreating footsteps faded into the wind. By sunrise, the Dillard property was alive again. Not with the sounds of family or farm work, but with engines, boots, and the low murmur of voices that belong to people who know what it means to find something they can't unsee. Detective Marianne Kepler stood by her cruiser, watching the forensics team unload their gear. The early light turned the fields pale gold, but it didn't make the place feel any less haunted. "Basement and the barn," she told the lead tech. "Treat them like separate crime scenes. And be careful. The floorboards are ready to give." Roy arrived minutes later, coffee in one hand, skepticism in the other. "You sure this isn't just an old creep squatting here?" Marianne shook her head. "I saw him, Roy. He was standing right above me." He studied her face, then sighed. "All right, let's say someone's camping out here. Why? After 60 years? That's what we're going to find out." Inside the house, the air had changed. Less dust, more disturbance. The forensic light swept across walls and floorboards, turning cobwebs into strands of glass. Down in the cellar, evidence markers now dotted the dirt floor. The photographs Marianne had found lay in sealed bags, along with fragments of something half buried in the soil. Thin slivers of wood and bone, charred black. "Could be animal remains," one tech muttered, brushing the dirt away. Marianne crouched beside him. "Or a cremation attempt," she said quietly. The cellar's far wall drew her attention, a patch of brick that looked newer than the rest. Someone had repaired it, maybe decades after the original foundation. She ran her hand along the mortar. This wasn't part of the 1963 structure. The tech tapped it with a small hammer. The sound came back dull, hollow behind the bricks. "Get me a camera," she said. "Let's open it carefully." It took 15 minutes to chip through the seal. When the final brick came loose, a rush of cold air spilled out, air that hadn't moved in decades. Behind the wall was a shallow cavity, maybe 4 feet deep. Inside, wrapped in layers of yellowed canvas, was a wooden box no larger than a child's toy chest. Marianne's pulse quickened as they lifted it out and set it on the table. The smell hit first: damp earth, old oil, and something else, faint but unmistakable. Decay. She nodded to the tech. "Open it." The lid groaned as the hinges gave way. Inside were personal items, arranged with eerie precision. A pair of children's shoes, caked with soil. A small airplane broken at the wing. A pocket knife engraved with the initials FD. And beneath them, a folded scrap of paper. Marianne used tweezers to unfold it. The handwriting was the same shaky script she'd seen on the note in the attic. He wanted to go with him. I told him no. I told him the woods weren't safe, but he followed anyway. I buried what I could. The rest I couldn't bear to see. They'll never find peace if I don't confess. FD. Marianne's breath came shallow. "Frank Dillard didn't kill his son," she whispered. "He hid what he found." Roy frowned. "So you're saying someone else?" "Caleb Ward," she said. "He was there that day. He worked with Frank. He was in both photographs. And if Frank found whatever was left of Tommy, he might have hidden it to protect his wife." Roy shook his head slowly. "So why the hell would Ward still be hanging around? He'd have to be in his 80s by now." Marianne looked toward the cellar door, the memory of the whisper still fresh in her ears. "Don't look at the photo. Some people don't die when they should," she said. "They just keep existing in the places they ruined." The forensic tech interrupted. "Detective, you'll want to see this." He held up a small object recovered from the box's lining, a film canister sealed with tape. Faded writing scrawled across it read, "July 63. Barn." Marianne's heartbeat quickened. "Get it to the lab. If that film's still viable, it might show what happened." By afternoon, the property was cordoned off. The county sent an excavator to clear the area near the collapsed well. While they worked, Marianne stood by the fence line, reviewing the photos on her phone. The 1963 picture, the newspaper image, the cellar discoveries. She noticed something she hadn't before. A faint figure reflected in the barn's window behind Tommy, barely visible under the grain. She zoomed in. The outline of a face, yes, but the angle of the head was wrong. Too elongated, the eyes shadowed deep and hollow. For a moment, she thought it might just be distortion. Then she remembered the button she'd found, the one from Tommy's overalls, embedded inside the barn wall. Someone had been in there after the disappearance, someone who wanted to make sure part of the boy stayed hidden. When the dig team hit something solid, the air filled with the dull thud of machinery stopping. "We've got something," a worker called out. Marianne approached. The excavator bucket had struck an old wooden beam, half rotted and collapsed inward. Underneath it lay a small mound of disturbed earth. They dug by hand after that. The first thing uncovered was fabric, thin, blue, tattered by time. Then bone, small, fragile. A hush fell over the field. Even the wind seemed to still. Roy removed his hat, lowering his eyes. "It's him," he said quietly. Marianne couldn't speak. The years of silence, the mother who died waiting, the father who carried guilt until it swallowed him. All of it ended here, in a shallow grave no bigger than a child's coffin. She crouched beside the site, her gloved hand trembling as she brushed the dirt from a fragment of cloth. The same blue as the button. Her radio crackled to life. "Detective Kepler, this is the lab. We processed that film canister. Talk to me." "There's degradation, but we recovered a few frames. Looks like the boy and another man near the barn. Hard to make out, but the timestamp on the film edge says July 15th, 1963. Day he disappeared." "Yes, ma'am." The strange part is the last frame. It's of the barn door, closed, and a hand pressed flat against the inside window pane. "Looks like a child's hand." Marianne closed her eyes. The image burned itself into her thoughts. Roy placed a hand on her shoulder. "What now?" She looked at the barn, its doorway yawning dark and open, as if it had been waiting for her to return. "Now," she said softly, "we find out who locked the door." The county lab sat behind a row of government offices in downtown Willow Creek, its brick exterior as ordinary as a post office. Inside, however, the air buzzed with hums of machines and the faint smell of photographic chemicals, ghosts of a past century's technology still lingering. Detective Marianne Kepler stood beside the technician, a young woman with steady hands and tired eyes, as the old film unspooled across the light box. "We managed to recover about 10 frames, the tech explained. "It's 8 millimeters, probably shot on a home movie camera. The emulsion was almost gone, but we stabilized what we could." She adjusted the playback monitor. The image flickered to life, grainy, ghost-like. A child ran across the frame, the bright Texas sun bleaching everything to white. "That's him," Marianne said softly. "Tommy Dillard." The boy looked exactly as he did in the photo. Overalls, buzz-cut hair, the grin of a child who believed the world was kind. He was running toward the barn, waving for someone off-screen to follow. Then the camera shifted. Another figure came into view, taller, in work clothes. face hidden by the glare. He hesitated before stepping forward, his hand brushing the boy's shoulder. The frame jolted. Static lines tore across the image, then darkness. "What happened there?" Marianne asked. The technician zoomed in on the next frame. "Looks like the film jumped or was stopped suddenly. You can see a partial fingerprint burned into the emulsion. Whoever handled it while it was still hot probably touched the reel. Can you lift it?" "Maybe. I'll need digital enhancement and comparison prints." "Give me a few hours." Marianne nodded, her eyes still on the screen. "Run facial reconstruction on the adult figure. I want to know if that's Caleb Ward." She left the lab and stepped into the afternoon sunlight. The air felt heavy, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Across the street stood Ward's old residence, the last known address before he'd vanished in 1985. It was now a boarded-up antique store, the windows dusty, the "For Lease" sign faded. Marianne crossed the street and peered through a gap in the boards. Inside, furniture sat under sheets, and a layer of dust softened everything like frost. The door gave with one push. The scent hit her first, stale wood, mildew, and something metallic beneath. Inside, she moved cautiously, flashlight sweeping the dark. On the wall near the counter, photographs were tacked in a pattern, dozens of them, curling with age. Each one showed families, parents, children, smiling at fairs, porches, lakesides, all taken from decades past. Every single one had one thing in common: a boy somewhere in the frame. She approached the wall. In the lower corner, her breath caught. It was the Dillard family photo, the same one from the archives. But this print was larger, clearer, and circled in red pen was the faint outline of Caleb Ward standing in the background. Next to it, a handwritten note in slanted script. He looked just like the others. Marianne's chest tightened. She pulled out her phone and took photos of everything. A noise came from the back of the store, a soft scuff of movement. She turned her light toward the sound. Ward. Silence. Then a faint creak of floorboards. Her hand moved to her gun. She advanced through the cluttered aisles, passing stacks of furniture draped like ghosts. The beam caught a mirror on the far wall, and for one chilling moment, she saw a figure reflected behind her. She spun. Empty air. But on the counter sat a tape recorder, an old model, the kind with mechanical buttons and a plastic mic. A cassette was already loaded inside. She pressed play. The tape hissed before a voice emerged, low, male, rasped with age. "You think you can just walk in here and solve it? You think a photograph tells you everything? It doesn't. Photos lie. They always did." Marianne froze. "He followed me that day. The boy. I told him not to. He wanted to see where the creek began. He wanted to see the old mine. I didn't mean for him to fall." There was a pause. A breath. "But once you start hiding one thing, you end up hiding all of it, and then you forget which part was the truth." The tape clicked and stopped. Marianne stared at it, the echo of his voice still in her ears. "You're alive," she whispered. She called Roy immediately. "Get a team to the old Ward store. We've got a recorded confession, partial. He's still out there." "Where are you going?" Roy asked. "To finish what he started." She returned to her car, mind racing. If Ward had mentioned the mine, it could only mean Tanner's Hollow, a stretch of collapsed silver tunnels north of the creek, sealed off since the late 50s after a cave-in. By the time she reached the overgrown trail leading there, the sun had dropped behind the hills. The world turned blue-gray, shadows deepening like bruises. She parked, flashlight in hand, and followed the narrow path. Crickets filled the silence, and the smell of damp earth grew stronger. At the edge of the old mining pit, she found it, a small clearing where the boards had been pried away, the chain lock hanging loose. Someone had been here recently. She descended into the narrow shaft, her light cutting through the dark. The tunnel walls were slick, the air cool. After about 30 feet, the passage widened into a small chamber. There, in the beam of her flashlight, stood a makeshift shrine. Photographs tacked to the wall, candles burned down to stubs, and a single name scratched into the rock. Tommy. Below it, a newer inscription. Forgive me before they find the truth. And beside that, in the dust, fresh footprints, too large to be her own. Marianne's pulse spiked. She raised her light, slowly sweeping the corners. "Caleb Ward!" Her voice echoed off the stone. "This is Detective Kepler. You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Dillard." Her words bounced back at her. But from deeper in the tunnel came another sound, breathing. Slow, uneven. Then a man's voice, cracked with age. "You shouldn't have come here alone." Marianne's hand tightened on her weapon. The light caught movement, the glint of metal, maybe a flashlight, maybe something else. She took a cautious step forward, the ground crunching beneath her boots. The breathing stopped, and then total darkness as her flashlight went out. For a moment there was nothing, no sound, no breath, only the black weight of the earth pressing in on Detective Marianne Kepler from all sides. Her flashlight had died as if the mine itself had swallowed the beam. She took one slow breath, then another. Her fingers slid along the tunnel wall, gritty and cold. "Caleb Ward," she called into the dark. "Put down whatever you're holding and come out." A scrape answered her, metal against stone, a cautious step. "Please," the voice said, hoarse and trembling. "No lights. Don't turn on the light." Marianne froze. "Who doesn't?" "The boy." The air seemed to thicken. She forced her voice steady. "Tommy Dillard is dead, Mr. Ward." A low laugh echoed off the rock, ragged and wet. "That's what I thought too." Her thumb found the backup light clipped to her belt. She flicked it on. The small LED carved a narrow tunnel through the dark. The beam landed on an old man kneeling beside the wall. His hair was white, his face pale beneath streaks of soot. He wore a miner's coat several sizes too big, and in his hands he clutched a rusted tin lunchbox pressed tight to his chest. "Caleb Ward," Marianne said quietly. He looked up. His eyes were pale blue, unfocused, pupils quivering against the light. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. "What's in the box?" His fingers tightened on it. "Everything that's left." She inched closer, weapon lowered. "Let me see it." He shook his head violently. "No, he stays quiet if I keep it shut." The tunnel creaked overhead, pebbles falling like dry rain. Marianne glanced upward, then back at him. "If you don't come with me, this place might bury us both." Ward's expression softened, almost childlike. "Maybe that's the only way it stops." Marianne took another step. "Tell me what happened, Caleb." He stared at the tin box, voice breaking. "Frank was drunk that morning. He always was. Said the boy needed toughening. Sent him to the creek with me to fetch water. I told him I'd take him as far as the ridge." He paused, swallowing hard. "The mine entrance was open then. Tommy wanted to explore. He said he heard music, children singing. I thought it was the wind through the pipes. He ran ahead before I could stop him." Ward's breathing hitched. The ground gave way. Just gone. The sound he made. His voice cracked, and for a moment the old man disappeared into memory. "I went after him. I found him at the bottom, alive but broken. He kept saying it was dark, that the singing had stopped." Marianne's throat tightened. "What did you do?" "I tried to carry him out, but the walls kept moving. It was like the earth wanted him. When I finally got to daylight, he wasn't breathing. Silence filled the mine. I buried him near the barn," Ward whispered. "Frank came later. Said I'd ruined everything. He built that wall in the cellar to hide what we found. But the boy didn't stay quiet." Marianne crouched, the small light trembling in her hand. You mean the noises? The scratches in the barn? Ward nodded slowly. He wanted to be found. The tin box in his lap rattled softly. Marianne's instinct screamed at her to step back, but she forced herself to stay. Caleb, what's inside? Ward looked at her with hollow eyes. Proof that ghosts don't sleep. He opened the latch. Inside, carefully folded in layers of yellowing cloth, lay a small skull and fragments of bone. Delicate, unmistakable. Beside them, a roll of undeveloped film, still in its metal canister. Marianne's breath left her. Oh, God! Ward's hands shook. I kept him safe. When they built the dam, I dug him up. I couldn't let them flood him. Caleb, listen to me, she said softly. We can take him home. The right way. But Ward only smiled faintly, tears tracking through the dust on his cheeks. He doesn't want to go home. He wants to stay where he fell. A deep rumble trembled through the floor. Dirt sifted from the ceiling. Marianne reached for him. We have to move, now! Ward clutched the box to his chest. Tell Frank's wife I'm sorry. Then, before she could grab him, he turned and stumbled deeper into the shaft. Caleb! The ground shuddered again. A beam cracked overhead. Marianne lunged forward, but a roar of collapsing stone cut her path. A wall of dust and darkness swallowed him whole. When the noise finally died, the tunnel was sealed. She staggered back toward the entrance, coughing, half blind. The light flickered and steadied. When she emerged into the open air, the sky had turned to twilight, bruised purple over the trees. Roy's voice burst through her radio. Marianne, you all right? We tracked your car to the hollow and thought, I'm fine, she rasped. Ward's gone. Collapse took him. What about the evidence? She looked down at her shaking hands. Somehow, in the chaos, she still clutched the film canister Ward had dropped when the tunnel gave way. The tin box was gone, buried with him. I've got something better, she said. Sit tight. I'm sending a rescue team. She turned toward the dark mouth of the mine, wind sighing through it like a final breath. Don't bother, she whispered. He's exactly where he wants to be. Hours later, back at the station, the forensic lights once again flickered over old ghosts. The new film was developed under controlled heat, frame by frame. The first few seconds matched Ward's story. Tommy laughing, running toward the ridge. The camera shook as if held by a nervous hand. Then the frame darkened, the world falling away into the mine's mouth. The last clear image showed Tommy's face turned toward the camera, his expression suddenly blank, as if he saw something behind whoever was filming. And then, one more frame, almost hidden in static. Caleb Ward's hand reaching for the lens, and in the blur beside it, a second smaller hand, pale, translucent, pressed against his. The reel ended. Marianne exhaled slowly. For the first time since she'd started digging through the past, she felt the story settle, not solved, but finished. She turned off the projector. The room plunged into darkness except for the faint afterglow of the last image burning in her mind. Two hands, one living, one long gone, reaching toward each other across 60 years of silence. Rain began before dawn, slow and steady, washing the dust of Tanner's Hollow down into the creek. From the ridge, the mine looked like a dark mouth gasping for air, the rescue lights flickering around it like restless fireflies. Detective Marianne Kepler stood beneath a tarp with Deputy Roy and the county fire chief. Mud streaked their boots. The air smelled of wet earth and gasoline. They found him yet? Roy asked. Not yet, Marianne said. Her voice was raw. The tunnel's unstable. Every time they dig, it shifts. The fire chief, a weary man with soot on his face, shook his head. If that old-timer's down there, he's not coming out alive. We've already pulled fragments of the box you mentioned. Everything else is buried under 15 feet of collapse. Marianne didn't answer. She stared into the mouth of the mine, rain dripping from the brim of her hat. In the distance, the field swayed in long gray lines, the world scrubbed clean, but still carrying ghosts. Behind her, reporters gathered near the barricades. 60 years of rumor had brought them running. Human remains confirmed at the Dillard farm. The headlines already read. Detective links new evidence to 1963 disappearance. Roy handed her a cup of black coffee. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," she said. "There's still one thing that doesn't fit." He raised an eyebrow. "Just one." "The film." She reached into her coat pocket and held up the evidence bag containing the newer canister recovered from Ward's body before the collapse. Ward admitted shooting it, but the lab says one fingerprint on the film stock isn't his. Roy frowned. "Then whose is it?" "They're running it now," she said quietly. "But it's not Frank Dillard's either." "Ellen's?" Marianne hesitated. "No, the system matched it to someone else. Someone still alive. Rain hammered the tarp." Roy's face tightened. "Who?" Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "State Forensics Division." She answered. "Kepler. Detective, it's Riley and Prince. We completed the comparison. That partial thumbprint from the 8mm reel matches one in our database from a driver's license renewal, dated 2 years ago." Marianne's stomach turned. "Name." "Match hits Roy Carter." The world seemed to go silent. She looked at him across the tarp, coffee steaming in his hand. His expression didn't change, but she saw the faint twitch of his jaw, a tiny flicker behind the eyes. "Copy that," she said softly, then ended the call. She slipped the phone into her pocket and stared at the rain. Roy spoke first. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said. "Just cold." He gave her a tired smile. "Let's wrap this up. You've done good work, March. The town finally gets closure." She nodded, forcing calm. "Yeah, closure," but the word felt wrong. By afternoon, the rescue crews called off the dig. The collapse had sealed the lower shafts completely. Caleb Ward's body, and whatever else lay with him, would remain buried. Marianne stood at the barricade long after everyone left. The rain had stopped, leaving mist clinging to the ground. Somewhere below her feet lay the boy, the man who buried him, and a truth still clawing at the dark. She turned to her car. Roy was waiting beside it, hands in his coat pockets. "Long day," he said. "You heading home?" "Soon," she replied. "You?" He smiled faintly. "You know me. I'll stay till the lights go out." She nodded, unlocked her door, and climbed in. But she didn't start the engine right away. She just watched him in the mirror, standing there in the rain's afterglow, a silhouette that didn't belong to the moment. Then she drove off. Back in her motel room, she pinned the newest photos to her wall. The investigation board now stretched across half the space, lines of twine connecting faces, locations, dates. In the center, the photo of Tommy Dillard. She stared at it for a long time. The boy's smile looked different now, forced, almost fearful. Her mind replayed the timeline. Ward said Frank was drunk that morning. Ward took Tommy to the creek. The boy vanished. But if Ward filmed the scene, who was holding the camera when both Ward and Tommy were in the frame? The reel had shown 2 people, one child, one adult, but never the face of whoever filmed. Someone else had been there. Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging." The mine wasn't the first burial. Marianne stared at it, heart thudding. She typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came seconds later. "You already know. You just don't want to." She looked at the motel window. Outside, the parking lot glistened under the streetlight, empty except for her car, and a second vehicle parked 2 spaces down. A county-issued sedan. Roy's. Her pulse quickened. She drew the curtains, locked the door, and reached for her sidearm. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. Check the cellar wall. She froze. The Dillard cellar had already been excavated and cleared. But if there was another wall, one they hadn't found. She grabbed her keys. The drive back to Willow Creek took 20 minutes. The farmhouse sat shrouded in fog, its windows dark. The police tape fluttered in the breeze. Inside, the air was colder than before. Her flashlight swept the cellar steps, the brick wall where the box had been hidden. Everything was as she'd left it, except the far corner. A section of dirt had been disturbed. She knelt, brushing away soil until her fingers touched brick. Not a wall, a doorway, sealed shut with old mortar. Something was carved faintly into one of the bricks. He helped me. Her breath caught. She took her pocket knife and began chipping away at the mortar. When the last brick fell loose, a draft of cold air brushed her face. Inside the small cavity lay a bundle wrapped in waxed paper. She pulled it out, hands trembling. The paper peeled back to reveal another film reel, this one labeled in faded ink. August 1963, Sheriff's copy. Sheriff's. The sheriff at the time was Cal Norris, Roy's uncle. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Marianne turned, gun raised, heart hammering. Roy stood at the top of the cellar stairs, his face shadowed by the dim light from above. "Mar," he said softly, "you shouldn't have come back." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "You were there. You filmed it." Roy took a slow step down. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. My uncle said it would just scare him, teach Frank a lesson, but Ward panicked. The boy fell." He stopped halfway down, rainwater dripping from his coat. "You were never supposed to find the photo." Marianne's hand shook. "Then why keep sending me clues?" He smiled faintly. "Because I wanted it to end." He reached into his pocket, pulled out something small, the button from Tommy's overalls. He placed it on the stair and stepped back. "Now it can." Before she could react, he turned and fled up the stairs, the door slamming behind him. Marianne bolted after, but by the time she reached the porch, Roy's sedan was already tearing down the road, taillights vanishing into the fog. She looked down at the button in her hand, slick with dirt and rain. It gleamed faintly under her light, the same blue as the sky in the old photograph. And in that instant, she realized the past wasn't buried. It was driving straight toward her. The storm had followed her back into town. Sheets of rain clattered on the motel roof while Detective Marianne Kepler threaded the brittle reel of film onto the station's projector. The label, August 1963, Sheriff's copy, glimmered under the fluorescence like a warning. She locked the door, drew the blinds, and hit play. The film crackled to life. Grainy sunlight flooded the screen. A familiar field, the Dillard barn bright and whole again. Off-camera voices murmured, men's voices, steady, businesslike. "Sheriff Cal Norris. Keep him in frame." Second voice, "He looks scared." Marianne froze. The second voice was younger but unmistakable. Roy's. On screen, Tommy Dillard stood near the barn door, clutching his toy plane, his smile uncertain. Behind him, a man stepped into view, Cal Norris, badge glinting. He crouched, saying something the microphone didn't catch, then pointed toward the woods. Tommy hesitated. Another man, taller, approached from the right. Caleb Ward. The camera jostled as someone whispered, "We'll scare him just a little." "Sheriff says his dad will talk after this." Marianne's stomach clenched. She recognized the rhythm of the breathing behind the lens, quick, uneven. The same as when Roy got nervous. The picture wobbled. Ward reached for the boy. Tommy backed away, shaking his head. The sheriff's hand darted forward, grabbing the boy's arm. The sound cut out, replaced by a harsh mechanical flutter. When the image steadied again, Tommy was gone. Ward stumbled into frame shouting, "He fell!" Norris shoved him aside and glared toward the camera. "Turn it off, Roy! Now!" Static swallowed the rest. The reel flapped against the projector, the ends slapping round and round until the machine clicked to a stop. For a long moment, Marianne couldn't move. The evidence she'd been chasing for months, 60 years of myth, had just rewritten itself. The disappearance hadn't been an accident or a random act. It had been a scheme, a sheriff using a child to squeeze a confession out of Frank Dillard for debts he didn't owe. A plan that turned to panic when the boy slipped. And Roy had been there, holding the camera. She rewound the film, slid it into an evidence bag, and grabbed her coat. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, the streetlights haloed in fog. Roy's sedan wasn't at his apartment, nor at the diner where he usually ended his shifts. But the radio crackled as she started her cruiser. "Unit 12, come in," the dispatcher said. "We've got reports of a vehicle abandoned near the river bridge. County plate, matches Deputy Carter's." Marianne's pulse jumped. "On my way." The road to the bridge twisted through the old mill district. The river was swollen, churning black under the headlights. Roy's car sat sideways on the shoulder, driver's door open, hazard lights blinking weakly. She called his name into the wind. No answer. On the hood of the sedan lay his badge and a folded envelope weighted by a small stone. She opened it with rain-numbed fingers. Inside were two items, a photograph and a letter. The photo was the same one she'd seen in every file, the boy in front of the barn. But this print was sharper. The man's shadow behind the barn was distinct now. Cal Norris, hat brim visible, hand outstretched. The letter was written in Roy's blocky handwriting. "March, I was 15. He told me it was a training exercise. 'Film everything,' he said. I didn't know until it was too late. When Tommy fell, he made me burn the footage. I thought I did. I thought it was gone. Ward tried to tell Ellen the truth. Sheriff called him crazy, said he'd hang for murder if he spoke. Frank built that wall to protect her from it. I kept the last reel because I couldn't stand the silence. You deserved to know. Everyone did, but I can't walk into that station and say it out loud. The badge doesn't wash it off. Tell her mother's waiting's over." Roy lightning flared, revealing a figure standing by the guardrail. Roy turned slowly toward her, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Marianne," he said, voice barely above the wind. "You saw it." "I did," she said. "Come back with me. We'll make it right." He smiled faintly. "There's no right left, March. Only what's left of the truth." He took a step back toward the edge. She lunged forward. "Roy, don't—" He tossed her his hat. "You finish it." Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark river below. The echo of the splash carried for seconds. Then nothing but rain. Marianne stood motionless, the hat dripping in her hands. Somewhere downstream, the current would take him past the fields, the barn, the place where everything began. Back at the station, she filed the reel, the letter, and the recovered photograph under a new case number. 1963-01/2023-06, closed pending historical review. But she couldn't make herself mark it solved. At dawn, she drove to the Dillard farm one last time. Mist clung to the grass. The barn's roof sagged but still held. She placed Roy's hat on the porch rail beside the cracked picture frame of Tommy and his mother. "Last good day," she whispered. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet hay and rust. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard a child's laugh, faint, distant, before it vanished into the trees. She turned toward her car. Behind her, the first light touched the barn door, and for an instant, the peeling red boards seemed to glow. Inside, dust rose in soft spirals, like breath. They found Roy Carter's body tangled in driftwood 20 miles downstream, near the old floodgate. The current had stripped away his badge chain and left his hands open, as if surrendering to the current. When Detective Marianne Kepler got the call, She didn't speak. She just drove out to the recovery site in silence, headlights cutting through the morning fog. Deputy teams waited on the embankment. The air smelled of silt and gasoline. A rescue diver in a yellow suit hauled the stretcher up the bank. A white tag fluttered from the zipper, RC-65. Marianne crouched beside the body bag, rain soaking the knees of her jeans. "He confessed before he jumped," she murmured. "That's enough." The coroner gave her a soft look. "Enough for the paperwork, maybe. Not for sleep." She nodded. Sleep had stopped meaning anything. Back in Willow Creek, the town reacted the only way small towns can, half mourning, half gossip. "Tragic," they said, shaking their heads in the diner. "But at least the truth's out." Yet Marianne felt the opposite. Truth didn't end things. It hollowed them. She boxed the evidence herself, Roy's letter, the sheriff's film, the damaged reels, and sealed them for the state archive. The case would go to a historical review board, maybe a documentary crew one day. But it was done. On paper. That evening she drove again to the river. The sun set behind the ridge, red and low. Water hissed against the rocks like whispering voices. She held the small blue button, Tommy's, and dropped it into the current. "Go home," she said softly. The ripples took it, spinning it out of sight. She turned back toward the car, only to see a man waiting on the path. A tall figure in a long coat, hat pulled low. For a heartbeat, her chest locked. Then he stepped into the light and she saw his face. Detective Kepler. He held up a state ID wallet. "Special Agent Daniel Mora, Pennsylvania Bureau of Investigation. We need to talk," he said. She studied him warily. "If this is about my report, it's already filed." "It's not about the report. It's about something we found this morning at the dam. Your friend's car washed up against the spillway. There was a second film reel in the trunk." Her pulse stumbled. "Another reel?" He nodded. "Stamped 1985, postmarked from this county, addressed to the sheriff's office but never mailed. You'll want to see it at headquarters." Mora led her to an evidence room where a technician threaded the reel onto a viewer. The footage was clearer than the others. Modern stock, color instead of black and white. The first frames showed Caleb Ward, older now, his face lined and gray. He sat at a kitchen table, the camera fixed on him as if for a confession. "If this ever reaches the sheriff," he said, "tell him I didn't mean to dig him up. The boy's gone, but someone keeps leaving pictures at my door." He slid a handful of photographs toward the camera. Marianne leaned closer. They were all of the Dillard property, taken decades after the crime. One showed the porch light on, though the house had been abandoned. Another showed the barn door open, a small figure standing inside, blurry, pale, almost luminous. Ward continued, voice shaking. "He's still there. The boy. Every time I burn one photo, another appears, always from behind the barn, as if someone's taking it from inside." The film ended abruptly, the frame freezing on Ward's face. The room was silent. Mora rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We can't tell if this was staged or not, but the negatives are genuine. They were developed on equipment that hasn't existed since the 70s. Marianne stared at the screen, the faint hiss of static still whispering through the speakers. "Who had this reel?" "Your deputy," Mora said. "Roy Carter. We think he retrieved it from Ward's house before the collapse. It was wrapped in oilcloth inside a box of photographs. Date on the envelope, March 1985, 2 months before Ward disappeared." Marianne closed her eyes. "He knew." "He wanted you to finish it," Mora said gently. "But maybe he wanted you to understand what it cost." She drove home after midnight. The roads empty except for fog crawling over the asphalt. In her apartment, the walls were bare now. No evidence board, no strings, no ghosts. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the rain ticking against the glass. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. At 2:17 a.m., her phone vibrated on the nightstand. An email notification. No sender, no subject. She opened it. One attachment, a JPEG image. It was a photograph of her, standing at the river earlier that day, her hand extended over the water, the blue button visible between her fingers. In the lower corner, the faint outline of a small boy stood beside her reflection. Her breath hitched. She closed the laptop and stared into the dark. Maybe it was a trick of light, maybe someone manipulating her online. But as the wind rose outside, she swore she heard a voice, thin, childlike, carried by the rain. "You found me." Marianne pressed her palms against her eyes until the sound faded. Morning would come, and she'd file the last report, and the world would move on. But part of her would always be standing by that river, waiting for something to surface, something that refused to stay buried. By morning, Detective Marianne Kepler had convinced herself the photograph was a hoax. Someone could have taken it from a distance, maybe a reporter trailing her at the river. Rational explanations were a detective's armor. She clung to them, but when she arrived at the station, the IT administrator was already waiting at her desk. "Detective," he said, "you asked us to trace that anonymous email." She nodded. He held up a tablet. "There's no sender. The server address is dead, literally doesn't exist. The image was sent from an offline source. But here's the strange part. The metadata says it was created on July 15th, 1963. Marianne stared at him. "That's impossible." "Yeah," he said, rubbing his neck. "I checked twice. The XIF lists Prototype Willow. That model doesn't exist. It's labeled Prototype Willow, whatever that means." Her mouth went dry. "Willow Creek." He gave a half shrug. Maybe some glitch in the conversion, but weird, right? She thanked him and shut the tablet. Weird didn't begin to cover it. The rest of the day passed in paperwork fog. Final statements for the district attorney. The formal report on Roy's death. By dusk, she was the only one left in the office. Rain started again, tapping on the window like fingers. She opened the photo on her laptop one more time. There she was by the river, and beside her, that faint silhouette of a boy. She zoomed in. Grain broke the image into pixels, yet the outline held. Face turned toward her, eyes like tiny voids. She tried something she hadn't before. Adjusting exposure, increasing contrast. Slowly, faint shapes emerged in the background. Trees, ripples, and what looked like a hand reaching from the water toward the boy's shadow. A chill moved through her. She turned off the laptop, grabbed her coat, and left. At home, she couldn't settle. The image burned behind her eyelids. By midnight, she gave up on sleep and drove to the archives building. The curator had lent her a key for after-hours access. She told herself she needed to file final paperwork. Inside, the old courthouse smelled of paper and dust. The evidence boxes from the Dillard case were stacked in the basement vault, numbered and sealed. She found the one marked Photographic Exhibits. She opened it, spreading prints across the table under a single lamp. There were the original photos. Tommy in front of the barn, Ellen on the porch, the sheriff's field shots. Each had the same soft light, the same angles, and in several of them, faint reflections, barely visible outlines, like someone else was always behind the lens. Her phone buzzed. Another anonymous email. Subject, Frame 11. Attachment, none. She frowned. No file, just a short line of text in the body. Behind you. Every instinct in her spine lit up. She turned slowly. At the far end of the basement, the automatic light had flickered on. Footsteps echoed on the tile, too heavy to be echoes of her own. "Who's there?" No answer. The light clicked off again. Silence. Her pulse thudded. She picked up her flashlight, sweeping it across the shelves. Dust motes swirled like tiny sparks. Nothing. She turned back to the table and froze. The photographs were rearranged. The one of Tommy that used to be on top was now underneath, and a new image lay where it had been, a still frame she hadn't seen before. It showed the interior of the barn, light streaming through a crack in the boards. In the corner, a woman knelt beside a child's shape on the floor. Ellen Dillard. Marianne's heart pounded. How? She lifted the photo. On the back, written in pencil, "He didn't die in the fall." She finished it. Her fingers went numb. That meant the entire narrative was wrong again. The father hadn't buried a body, he'd buried a lie. She hurried to the scanner, feeding the photo through for high-resolution capture. As the machine processed, she heard another sound. A low mechanical whir coming from the next room, the film projector. Someone had turned it on. She moved toward the sound. The beam cast flickering light against the far wall, cycling through familiar frames. Tommy running, the barn, the creek. But then a new image appeared. Grainy, washed-out color. Her, standing in the archive basement right now, flashlight in hand. The frame jumped, as if whoever held the camera had moved closer. Her breath hitched. "Stop it," she whispered. The next frame filled the wall. A close-up of her face, eyes wide, frozen in fear. She spun toward the projector, gun drawn. It was running, but no one was there. The film reel spun freely, end flapping, projector still humming though no film remained. Then the lamp burst with a pop. Darkness swallowed the room. Her phone vibrated again. Another message. She didn't need to open it. The screen preview already said enough. Last good day. Something moved in the dark behind her, soft as breath. She turned the flashlight back on. The room was empty, but the photographs she'd left on the table were gone. Everyone except the newest print, the one of Ellen in the barn. Only now, there were two figures kneeling beside the child. The second was Marianne. Her flashlight trembled in her grip. She whispered to the dark, "What do you want from me?" And from somewhere in the black, a small, distant voice answered, "To be remembered right." The light flickered, once, twice, and went out. The power failure stretched for hours. When dawn crept through the courthouse windows, Detective Marianne Kepler was still in the basement, sitting among the toppled boxes and broken projector bulb, her flashlight dying to a pale glow. The new photograph lay across her knees. She'd stared at it for so long that the faces had begun to shift. Ellen's features softening, the second figure, hers, blurring at the edges. She knew it was impossible. Yet every instinct said she was now inside whatever story the Dillards had left behind. By the time the janitor unlocked the front door, Marianne had packed the photo into an evidence envelope and walked out without a word. At her apartment, she showered until the water ran cold. Steam fogged the mirror, but when she wiped it clear, her reflection lagged a fraction of a second behind. A trick of light, she told herself. Exhaustion. Still, when her phone buzzed again, she flinched. From Frame 12 at unknown. Subject, you missed one. Attachment, barn interior 2.jpg. She opened it. It was the same image. Ellen kneeling beside the boy. But now Ellen's head was turned slightly, her eyes locked directly on the camera. On Marianne. Her stomach dropped. The timestamp, today's date, 5:42 a.m. The exact minute she'd left the archive. Someone was watching her in real time. She drove to the Dillard farm. The morning was gray. The fields washed silver with dew. The barn loomed ahead, its boards scarred by years of wind and rot. The air smelled of damp hay and iron. Inside, dust floated through slants of sunlight like tiny ghosts. The floorboards creaked under her boots. She could still see where the sheriff's markers had once been, small circles of chalk, long since faded. She knelt in the same corner shown in the photo, nothing but a scattering of leaves. She ran her hand over the boards. One plank felt loose. She pried it up with her pocket knife. Underneath was a cavity lined with decayed canvas. Inside, an old Polaroid camera and a stack of undeveloped film sheets sealed in wax paper. Her breath caught. The brand. Willow Prototype. She stared at the lens. The thing looked hand-built, like something from a lab, not a factory. A serial number etched by hand, 1963-11. She slipped on gloves and lifted the bundle out carefully. The air beneath the planks smelled of oil and earth, as if the box had been buried deliberately to keep it preserved. In the distance, a vehicle engine rumbled. She froze, listening. It was close, too close. A black sedan pulled into the yard. Agent Daniel Mora stepped out, his long coat flapping in the wind. "Detective," he called, "you beat me here." Marianne stood, wary. "How did you know I'd come?" He gave a thin smile. "You're predictable." "Besides, we recovered something from Roy Carter's locker this morning. A journal. He wrote about this barn, about the camera that remembers. I figured you'd want to see it." He handed her a small notebook sealed in evidence plastic. She peeled it open. Inside, Roy's handwriting spiraled across the pages. Disjointed entries, almost manic. The camera takes what it sees and keeps it alive. Norris said it's proof. Proof of God's eye. Ward said it was a curse. They tested it on the boy. Every picture shows him clearer. If the prototype still works, it can finish what it started. But it doesn't forget who holds it. Marianne felt her chest tighten. "You think this thing actually captures something?" Mora shrugged. "We're just trying to piece together what happened. Some experimental imaging device, maybe. Government surplus. Or superstition." She set the notebook down, eyeing him. "Why does it sound like you already know more than you're telling me?" He smiled faintly. "Because I've read the files you haven't." He reached inside his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "This was sent to our office yesterday. No return address. It's for you." She opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid, freshly developed. It showed her standing exactly where she was now, in the barn, holding the camera, Mora just behind her. Except she hadn't seen anyone take it, and she hadn't pressed the shutter. Her heart pounded. "Where did this come from?" Mora stepped closer. The letter said, "Finish the roll." Before she could react, he drew a sidearm. "Put the camera down, detective." She froze. "Why?" "It doesn't belong to you." "It's evidence from a classified project. Operation Willow, 1963. The sheriff wasn't just keeping order. He was guarding technology developed for a 1963 pilot called Operation Willow. Residual imprint imaging for psychological reconnaissance. The camera captured impressions, residual images left by emotional trauma. The boy wasn't the first test subject. Her voice trembled. "And you've been using me to find it." He nodded once. "We needed someone the town trusted." "You did well." Something inside her snapped. The long, tight coil of exhaustion and guilt. "You're not taking it." Lightning flashed outside. She flinched, the camera slipping from her grip. It hit the floor and clicked. The flash filled the barn like daylight. When the glare faded, Mora stood perfectly still. His gun hung limp at his side. His pupils had dilated, his breath shallow. He turned his head slowly toward her. "Detective," he whispered, "what did you—" Then he stopped, his eyes unfocused, as if looking past her. Marianne backed away. The Polaroid spat from the slot, curling on the floor. She snatched it up. The image was already forming. It showed the interior of the barn. Empty. No Mora, no her. Just sunlight and dust. The spot where Mora had stood was vacant. She looked up. He was gone. No sound, no movement. Just gone. Her hand shook. She picked up the notebook and camera, shoved them into her bag, and ran. Outside, the sky had turned the color of wet ash. The wind smelled of rain and old hay. She drove back toward town without looking in the rear-view mirror, because she was afraid of what she might see there. Back at her apartment, she locked the door, placed the camera on the table, and stared at it under the dim kitchen light. The lens glinted faintly, as if aware. She whispered, "What are you?" No answer, just the faint whir of the film motor rewinding itself for the next shot. Marianne didn't sleep. The little apartment felt too still, every tick of the clock a camera shutter in disguise. The Willow prototype sat on the table like a dormant heart, the lens reflecting the kitchen light in slow pulses. She tried to read, to file her notes, to convince herself she was in control, but each time her gaze drifted back to the black-bodied relic that had swallowed a man whole. At 3 a.m., she made a decision. She pulled gloves on, loaded a fresh sheet of film, and whispered, "One last picture." The shutter clicked. For an instant, light flared bright enough to bleach the room white. Then the world fell silent again. The new print slid from the slot, faint gray shapes forming as it developed in her trembling hands. It wasn't her apartment. It wasn't even the present. The photo showed the Dillard living room, restored, curtains drawn, a boy sitting cross-legged on the rug, a woman at the piano. And behind them, a man in uniform, sheriff's badge gleaming, looking straight into the lens. Sheriff Norris. She stared at the image until the walls around her seemed to tilt. The impossible picture shimmered faintly, as if it breathed. On the back, someone had scrawled in pencil, "The watcher becomes the watched." The power flickered. A low hum rolled through the air, deep and electric. The camera's motor started to wind on its own. Another photograph ejected, this one blank at first, then slowly resolving into a mirror of her kitchen now. But she wasn't alone. Standing behind her in the reflection was Maura, pale, eyes hollow, whispering something her ears couldn't quite catch. Her heart hammered. "Stop," she said. "I'm done." The camera whirred again. Another flash exploded. When her vision cleared, the kitchen was empty. The air smelled faintly of ozone and river water. On the table lay the newest print. The same kitchen, same table, except the Willow camera was gone. She lifted the photograph. Something moved in it. The faintest ripple across the glossy surface, like wind across a pond. Then a voice behind her, small and familiar. "You found me, remember?" She turned. A boy stood in the hallway doorway, no older than 8, wearing short pants and a striped shirt she'd seen 100 times in the case files. Tommy Dillard. Her mouth went dry. "You're—" He shook his head gently. "Not the way you mean." "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you were next in the picture." She felt the cold crawl up her spine. "You want to rest, don't you? That's why all of this started." Tommy tilted his head, thoughtful. "I just wanted them to stop telling lies about me." "The lies?" "That I fell. That I died quick." His voice faltered. "I woke up down there. Mama was crying. Sheriff said it had to look like an accident. Tears burned behind her eyes. Ellen didn't—" "She didn't mean to. He told her to." The boy's outline flickered like candlelight. "Now they're all gone except you. You took the last picture. You decide how it ends." The air vibrated. The photograph in her hand darkened. Shapes began forming on it again. The barn, the sheriff, the mother, the boy, and now her standing among them. "Tell the truth," he whispered. "Then let it go." He stepped forward and pressed a small, cool object into her palm. A blue button. The room dimmed. When the lights came back, the hallway was empty. At sunrise, Marianne drove to the river one final time. Mist rose off the water, the world painted in gray and silver. She carried the Willow camera wrapped in a towel and the stack of photos inside a tin box. On the bank she hesitated, the button in one hand, the camera in the other. The water hissed softly against the stones like an audience holding its breath. She placed the tin box in the shallows. "You're done," she said, voice trembling. She let the river pull it under. The camera followed with a heavy splash. Sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the current. For a moment she thought she saw a child's silhouette standing midstream, smiling, hand raised in farewell. Then the mist swallowed it. Later that morning she filed her last report. Case closed. Dillard disappearance, 1963 to present. She omitted any mention of moving photographs or a man vanishing in a flash. Only this: the truth is not what time forgets, but what refuses to fade. She signed her name and turned in her badge. 2 months passed. Autumn came to Willow Creek, painting the hills copper and red. Marianne rented a small house by the water and spent her days fixing it up, painting the porch railings, planting herbs. Some nights she still dreamed of flashbulbs and the hiss of the river, but the dreams were softer now, less demanding. Then, one evening, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a single-framed photograph. Her standing at the riverbank at dawn, arms empty, sunlight behind her. No boy, no camera, just peace. She hung it on the wall by the window. For once, it stayed still. But when the wind blew through the house, sometimes the picture glass caught the light and threw a brief blue glimmer across the room, like the wink of a button sinking beneath the water. Marianne would look up, half smile, and whisper, "Rest easy, kid." The people of Willow Creek don't talk about the Dillard case anymore. Not directly. It's just something folded into local lore, the way any small town hides its shame, with a new name and a softened ending. The diner waitress calls it the story of the boy who lived in photographs. Kids whisper that if you go to the old bridge at night and shine your phone light on the water, you can still see a blue flicker just beneath the surface. Detective Marianne Kepler never corrects them. She left the force quietly that fall. No ceremony, no speeches. Just a signed resignation letter and a handshake from the new chief who promised to keep an open file for future review. She smiled politely, knowing he wouldn't. The truth wasn't meant for paper anymore. Her cottage overlooked the same stretch of river where everything had ended. Each morning she walked to the edge with her coffee and watched the fog lift off the current. Sometimes she imagined she saw movement, ripples circling where there should be none. But she'd learned to let the river keep its secrets. Inside her home, the walls were mostly bare. Only one picture hung above the fireplace, the photograph that had arrived in the mail, her standing by the water at sunrise, the world calm around her. It had become her anchor, proof that something broken could still look whole from a distance. She spent her days cataloging the remaining case notes for the county museum. The curator, a young woman named Elise, was turning the Dillard story into a local history exhibit. Vanished? Mysteries of the Creek. Marianne offered only the sanitized version, the official documents, a few copies of the sheriff's reports, the restored photos of the farm before the tragedy. The rest she destroyed. No one would ever rebuild that camera, not if she could help it. One evening, Elise stopped by to drop off paperwork. "You sure you don't want your name on the display?" she asked. "You're the one who solved it." Marianne smiled faintly. "Some stories don't need an author. They just need an ending." Elise looked around the quiet room. "Still feels like he's here, doesn't it?" "Who?" "The boy." Marianne paused. The fire popped softly. "Maybe," she said, "but he's not lost anymore." After the curator left, night settled heavy and clear. Crickets hummed in the grass, and moonlight spilled across the window glass. Marianne poured a small drink and sat by the fire. She thought about Roy, about Ellen, about the sheriff who'd believed he could trap guilt inside a photograph. They'd all been chasing permanence, trying to freeze a single moment so it could never be erased. But life wasn't made to stand still. That was the curse the camera had carried. It remembered too well. Outside, wind rattled the porch chimes. She set her glass down and walked to the window. Mist curled over the river like breath. The air smelled of rain, clean and metallic. In the faint moonlight, she saw something caught among the reeds near the bank, a shape glinting blue. She slipped on her boots and stepped out into the night. The grass was cold against her ankles. Down at the water's edge, a small object bobbed in the current. She crouched and reached in. A button, the same soft enamel, chipped on one side. She held it in her palm, water dripping between her fingers. A laugh, not quite sound, more a memory, seemed to brush the back of her mind. "You found me." She closed her fist gently. "Yeah," she whispered. "Go home." When she opened her hand again, the button was gone, swept away in the eddying current. The next morning dawned bright. For the first time in months, no dreams had followed her into waking. She made coffee, fed the stray cat that had adopted her porch, and opened the window to let in the crisp October air. Downstream, construction crews were starting to dismantle the old dam. The news said they wanted to restore the natural flow. She smiled at the phrase. Nature always restored itself eventually. Rivers, memories, even truth. You could dam it up for a while, but eventually it found a way through. At noon, she visited the museum. Elise had finished setting up the display. In the glass case, a replica of the Dillard farm sign, copies of the newspaper clippings, and one enlarged black and white photo of Tommy grinning in front of the barn. No shadows, no strange figures, just a boy and summer sunlight. Beneath the caption, "Last Good Day, 1963, Elise had placed a simple plaque, dedicated to all the stories small towns forget to tell the right way. Marianne stood there a long time. She felt something ease inside her chest, grief, relief, maybe both. Then she turned toward the door. Outside, children were playing along the sidewalk, their laughter sharp and alive. The sound followed her down the street, blending with the rush of the reopened river beyond the trees. For the first time, Willow Creek sounded like it belonged to the living. Later that night, a storm rolled over the hills. Rain swept against the windows, and lightning briefly illuminated the cottage walls. When the flash faded, the photograph above the fireplace glimmered faintly, not from light, but from within the print itself. For a second, another figure appeared beside her image. A small boy standing ankle-deep in water, smiling toward the horizon. Then the glow dimmed, and he was gone. Marianne didn't move. She just breathed, the thunder receding into distance. The picture on the wall was quiet again. The river outside whispered against its banks, carrying whatever remained of 60 years of secrets out to sea.